We're going. Welcome. Tonight we are going to analyze Dead Poet Society, or we're going to try to. And let's start off by identifying the four through lines. Let's begin with the overall story. Probably the easiest one of all of them. Yeah, these are the lines. So what is the big picture about?
Life at boarding school in the 50s.
Okay. Sure, that's the setting, but put a little bit of the conflict in there. I mean, yeah, that's sort of part of it, but
Conformity at boarding school?
Well, yeah, the clash of values between conformity and nonconformity, tradition versus, passion, and, the headmaster's approach to the school versus Keating's approach to teaching.
It would be 60s, right?
1959.
Okay. Well, that's actually it's pretty much like the 1960s to do further, but okay, 1950s,
Yeah.
50s,
Prep school.
and prep school.
okay, so the pressure to conform at a 1950s men's prep school. I mean, that's kind of gets everybody in the entire story, and you look at where the big conflicts are, it's all about
Conformity and the pushback
or
against
not.
Yeah.
conformity, pushback, yeah.
Right. So that's what the conflict. Okay, let's start by identifying who we think the possibilities are for the main character.
I would say, for one, the Ethan Hawke character. That would be my first.
Okay, and what's his name?
I think it's Todd. No, that's Todd Anderson.
Todd.
Todd Anderson.
Yes.
Todd.
Okay, Todd.
I'm sorry.
Are there any other?
Which one is Todd?
Todd is the mousy guy who stands up at the end and says, "Captain, my captain."
The first one to stand up.
Okay.
Well, yeah.
Which seems to be important.
Well, he says, "Captain, my captain," not, "Oh, Captain, my captain," which the second guy says. Anyway,
That says the class would be.
right. And then nobody else says anything when they stand up.
Right.
So he's the new kid.
Mm-hmm. Which it seems to follow that he,
Well, let's not argue for it yet.
Yeah.
Okay.
Are there any other votes, or
Well,
is that
I mean, just in terms of listing candidates.
Well, only list them if you can make an argument for it. I don't want it just because.
Because I just want to ask if this is a case of a multiple main character, kind of a handoff main character, at least in terms of the film. I don't know about the original source material, but
no, we're doing an analysis of the film.
Right, because you feel like Todd's going to be
So what characters are you talking about in that group?
the Todd, Neil, the guy Nwanda. And the guy who goes after the girl. Sort of collectively, they seem to be handing off the main character perspective, almost episodically. I mean, it's like it's his turn.
By main character perspective, what do you mean by that?
We are rooting for the guy. We are feeling for the guy. We feel attracted to the girl the way that guy does. We feel, we want to pursue acting. We're feeling Neil's passion. We're feeling I forgot the guy's name, but Nwanda's.
And Knox.
Okay.
I feel
we'll negotiate all of this in a moment. But, yeah.
So basically, we just say the group.
Yeah.
Because
there's the Dead Poet Society group minus a couple of the peripheral guys who are not as.
But also, I do feel Neil's pain.
Yeah.
In terms of just empathizing with one of the characters. So I would
just out of curiosity again, because I missed the first.
Neil is the suicider,
so,
right?
But how is he in the beginning? Because I missed the first couple of scenes. Is he just the same guy throughout? Like in the beginning, he's kind of a.
no.
Well, sorry, I just.
Well, no. He definitely had. he's the one who initiates the Dead Poets Society. You know,
But in the beginning, is he kind of conformist, or is he already sort of?
Go ahead,
He's
Jeff.
totally repressed by his dad.
But for Neil,
Oh.
we're not there when he shoots himself, so that knocks out him being the main character.
Okay, I
No.
wouldn't use a single instance only because in that particular regard, what if we were supposed to be the dad? I don't think so. It's supposed
No,
to be
But if we're experiencing it from his first-person perspective, then we would actually be there in the moment. You don't have the main character.
maybe
we came very
maybe.
close.
That's a storytelling moment
But
because
also,
it's a reveal that it's kind of nice as a reveal. But
I would also knock off Nwanda because he writes the letter and does what he thinks, but he does it all off screen. So
Right.
We're not him.
okay.
Okay.
But that's when we're going to start negotiating who we actually think it is. But we want to put, before we start arguing for one or the other, let's get all the four threads in there, because I think we might find some we've done before. Where it's like, oh, this is a better character scene here than there, and once we start looking at what the relationships are, some of this will settle out. Okay, how about for an influence character? Keating.
But I also think Neil is an influence character to Todd.
To Todd, yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
I agree, but it's just there are times when it's like that relationship story, the relationship story of being roommates.
Yeah.
Okay, wait.
Okay.
Before we get into relationships, sorry.
All right.
Let's, I want to try to keep this as linear as possible. All right. So, any other influence characters that we see potentially? Okay. So, relationship of Todd, and we got a whole bunch of different ones. Okay, Todd and Keating. Is that, do you see the relationship with Todd and Keating the same as Neil and Keating?
No.
If they're not, then they're not
They're
the
not.
same.
I don't-
They're not the same story and the
Okay,
same
yeah.
as both main characters.
No, they're not. Because one's
I don't
Okay.
think
Well, right. That's a really great distinction that they make it abundantly clear in a scene you didn't see when they first basically, well, not when they first meet, but shortly thereafter. Sort of like the second time the two really have a moment like that. And Neil is trying to convince Todd to do something, and Todd won't do it because he won't do things.
Right.
And then they pretty much say do her and be her without saying do her and be her. Okay, so the group and Keating, is that the same? Is it the same as Todd and Keating, or Todd and so the thing is, I think
I see Todd. I'm sorry. I see Keating and Group and Keating and Neil being the same. That
wait,
Keating's
Keating,
relationship with the group.
these two.
I see Keating's relationship to Neil being the most prevalent relationship. It's part of the relationship with the group.
Okay.
And that is, his relationship is one of sort of encouragement and
And how does that differ from everybody else in that classroom? If any of the other students in his English class came to him with the same problem, would it be significantly different?
no, I think he'd do the same.
And especially if you look at it in terms of the ones who are, whether they're standing or not, you see that you know the ones that are bowing their heads and not standing up at the end. You know that they are doing that because the authority figure, they're bowing to that authority figure, and the others are the ones that were affected by his teaching style and philosophy or whatever, are the ones that are standing up and facing him at the end.
Right.
So there you've got a very, so you see the relationship between the students and Keating very clearly as something that's really in the overall story. It's about conformity. That last scene is about conformity.
Right.
And non-conforming.
Well, conformity, that's in the positive and negative, the conforming or you're not conforming.
Mhm.
But it's, and because that's what his whole philosophy is about not conforming, don't walk the same way everybody else does, don't fall in the same step that would be unique, all of that. That's all part of that. Okay, and so I think the thing is that because it's so heavily about the teacher and his pupils and the philosophy that's carried on by that, you see that in there. Now I find it interesting that nobody really sees the group as a possible influence character, which is fine. I don't really think it is, but
yeah, I don't even see Keating as a character, to be honest. So
he's clearly a
I'll be
guardian.
surprised if he is.
I mean, clearly a guardian character, but the guardian character always tends to feel like an intact character.
Right. He definitely has an influence on the kids. But,
Well,
of course, it
has
does.
an influence on everyone.
As a mentor.
and it's also a heavily character-driven story.
Yeah.
So rather than looking at archetypes and exploring them very simply, you really do spend a lot of time exploring all the different approaches to trying to solve the conformity issue.
Yeah.
With the redhead
Yeah.
logic character, I mean, has absolutely incapable of doing anything that's not linear. Him being the conformist view,
Right.
the one who is the rat at the end. It's very predictable. That's what he's going to do because that's his approach.
What's his name?
Meeks.
No, that's it.
No, not. Yeah, was it
No.
Meeks
I'll look that up.
or Weeks?
No,
That's the other redhead.
Yeah.
Oh,
two redheads.
then-
the one with glasses and the one without, I think.
Oh, right. The one with the glasses. Right, the redhead with glasses, not the redhead with the buzz cut or the pompadour or whatever that was. Okay. So, it seems. So, what is the relationship between Todd and Neil?
The roommates.
Right.
The roommates.
And what other aspects of them that it makes them similar or dissimilar? That you and I are just like, no, we're nothing alike.
Yeah, I see that.
Parents telling us what to do.
No, you've got the new guy, the one who's basically been there the whole time. They both have elder siblings that are noted for being there.
And they both have parents who are not, the most nurturing and caring. Yeah, they both have parent issues.
Yeah, but I mean, but the things that are really part of what defines them at school is, their legacy.
Mm-hmm.
So there is somewhat issues of. Oh, actually, I don't know. No, the one that Todd has a legacy. I'm not sure if Neil
He
does.
doesn't.
No, he
He's only
doesn't
child.
because he doesn't have any kids, any brothers or sisters, right? But he's the one who's been there all that time. So you've got someone who's sort of got the history but is new, and you've got someone who's got the history because he's been there the whole time.
Right.
Yeah. And so that's kind of, again, they're similar but dissimilar. So that's a really clear
Relationship.
And one, again, plays it safe, keeps to himself. The other one's very precocious,
I wouldn't say that Todd keeps it safe. I think he's very difficult and practically incapable of expressing himself.
Mm-hmm.
And which is where you get moments. There are moments where Keating pops in and does kind of act as an influence character, or
Yeah.
And I think you've got Neil has a personal story. The thing with his father, there is a little bit of a story there that's a sub story that's not really well explored, but it is there are specific beats to it, just as there are with what's his name, who's going after the girl, the cheerleader.
Right.
Knox. Right. Knox also has sort of a side story that could have been bigger. I think what they did is they tried to give the ones that were more interesting a little bit of a side story. Luanda has this thing about we know that he is a much more of a free spirit and bucking the system kind of guy, more of a antagonist kind of thing. But and he's the one who brings the girls. He's definitely the temptation and Ender. You know, he's got those elements. He's the one who brings in the liquor, and brings in the girls, and brings in the smoking. You know, so you see that, but we don't really see him do those things. You know, as you were talking about, you don't see him making up the plan, or we find out when the same time the main character finds out.
Right.
You know, when Todd finds out, that's when we, as an audience, find out, and of course everybody else in that group. And then there's the group dynamic, which is kind of where the story is centered, and I'm not exactly sure how we explore that except as an extension of what's going on in the class, because it's Keating and his teachings.
That's not overall story?
Yeah, it is.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
That's what you're saying. Okay.
Yeah, but I'm saying it's sort of taking the overall story, that conformity, nonconformity, and just moving it to a separate location. But it's still teacher and his students.
Right. Can we talk a little bit about why Todd is the main character and not Neil, with Todd as the impact character? Because my gut says Todd is the. My main thing is that I don't see Todd influencing Neil at all, but I do see it the other way. But what are the other reasons why Todd is the character versus the actor?
Well, part of it, I mean, I think Todd is, I think Neil's the protagonist. He's the one who's driving. He's the one that says, "Let's do this club. Let's." You know, he's the one pushing the edges. He's always the one who's saying, let's go, which is one of the reasons why he, and also since he's a subjective character, he feels like he might be the main character.
Right.
But I think it seems like emotionally we're brought into this world, we don't understand the rules. It's very strange, it's very stilted, and you know, when I don't know about you, but when Todd makes a breakthrough in terms of the poem, when he, you know, Keating is covering his face and making him speak effectively, that his elation at that is something that I felt as well.
Yeah.
You know, I felt sorry for Neil. I didn't feel suicidal. You know, I could see the symbols of what was coming. I didn't feel it.
Right.
But when Todd finds out, I did feel the sorrow at that point. And so those are indicators to me that why that would, from an audience point of view, why I think that that's effectively what is happening. And it's interesting, the opportunities for Keating to become a main character, they make very explicit that he is not. The kids go out and they talk to him about this thing, and then he walks away.
Yeah.
You know, all of these different things, he's never on the inside. You know, even when Neil basically lies to him, we kind of have a suspicion, we don't know, but we have a suspicion that he's lying to him. You know, so, and it's partially the reason they do that is to make the firing so unfair, because he did the thing that a teacher should do. You know, he did make the right recommendations and stuff, but it was, you know, he started the fire, and in this one instance it went out of control, and so he takes, you know, he's okay with taking the blame for that.
Right.
But I mean, my view on it, you know, you could tell from the way the camera was on Ethan Hawke, on Todd, that
Really close.
there was an intent, and we end on him. You know, the last shot is on him, and so there's certainly an intent that Todd seems to be the main character. All right, but his story is not developed enough to have to basically fulfill a full main character through line.
Correct. Yeah.
And that's why I feel like I mean it's similar to the South Park movie. In the South Park movie, you know, the main character point of view is shared by all four boys, but it's like Stan is kind of the A main character, and Kyle's the B main character, and I feel like that's what it is here, is that maybe Todd is sort of the A main character, but the main character energy and the through line and the signposts and everything are bouncing around. And so that's where like the rest of the group.
And here's where I would disagree.
Collectively.
Here's where I disagree. I think if you don't think about the story form, I think you're right. The minute you throw a story form in there, it completely negates that. There are no other beers in that group that are like Todd.
That have huge changes.
There are just nobody else. Everybody else is pretty much a doer.
Oh, you don't feel like the group collectively has a change arc?
No, because I think that's probably the OS. It's probably like psychology.
No, because,
well, okay, yeah, in an internal domain.
Yeah, and the group has a growth pattern, but it's a growth pattern that's like looking at a plant cycle.
Mm-hmm.
It's not developing, an identity. It is just, here's how things mushroom and die off, or are clipped, And I think what's interesting, very interesting, is that if you look at the kids as, in this one more than most, let me go back to one of the very first things that we did when we developed Dramatica. We came up with the idea of the 8 archetypes, and we also came up with the idea that you have the introduction, interaction, dismissal, so that characters are introduced, they interact, and then one by one, each character is disproven as capable of resolving the story problem, and they're either killed off or they are made otherwise neutral to resolving the story issue, and that's how you prove the point that this approach and not all the other ones is the right approach. And the fact that Neil is a very steadfast kind of person who pushes and pushes and pushes, but in the overall story, he's the one who basically falls on it. You can't, in that world, you cannot be the protagonist, the one who leads the charges, the one who gets shot first. It's the first victim,
right.
And I think that's kind of where that logistically falls in the big picture. And I also think that that's why the story wraps up relatively quickly after that, because you don't have the influence character of Neil still there. His presence is around long enough, and you sort of get a transference in that last part that it's Keating, because he's given the blame for it, so he's sort of assigned that function. And then, of course, the last scene with his physical presence there, walking right by Todd, and Todd wanting to reach out, and doesn't. There's that pressure, He's got conform at the front of the room, and nonconformity is walking out the door. And the only opportunity he has to change and to go from a beer to a doer is to do something. And he has that one moment where he could reach out and touch him, he doesn't, and then at the last minute he stands up. So you see that represented by Keating at that moment. But for the most part, and so Keating does play a very profound role, but he's mostly in his teacher role. Mostly, not always, but mostly. And it's also, it's one of those things where you run into a problem where you have a really attractive character. People are drawn to them, just as the kids are drawn to his character, to his philosophy, to his joie de vivre, to his, I'm not going to put up with this baloney attitude, which, of course, they've really been bucking everything that's going on in the school. They're at that age.
It's interesting in a movie about nonconformity, the protagonist, or the guy leading the charge, and then Nuwanda, who's also so nonconformist, both
right,
fall.
the two extremes.
They both fall.
Yeah, the one that is closest well, the antagonist isn't really part of the group, not really. So the one that's the protagonist, I mean, they all fall.
Yeah.
They all fall except, I mean,
Yeah.
except at the end. Huh?
I'm sorry. Which
No, I mean that's the price of nonconformities. You fall
Right.
out of that system. Yeah, I don't think anything's gonna change. Yeah, you're just gonna say, "Get off the desk. You're out of here."
Yeah,
Right, you don't know. That's so they leave it. They leave it
That's all
on.
that
They leave it unanswered because I think the point wasn't graduating. The point was graduating. You have a different story. I don't think that's not what the story goal is. It's not about I've got some students I got to get them to graduate. You know.
There's 32 days.
Right. Well, it doesn't have to be a time lock. All right. So it does seem that Todd is the main character and Neil, with a whole lot of filling in by other players when necessary.
Yeah.
But the thing is that those scenes where they are main and influence character are so like spot on. They're just like okay.
For running around the bed.
Yes.
yeah.
That whole scene is, it starts off with the argument, do or be or do or be or be. I'm a beer, I can't do that. You need to do it, you need to do it, follow me. Okay. So with that, let's just move over to the dynamics. Main character resolve, change or steadfast. This would be Todd. Change, yeah. And we also see Neil is so steadfast that he is unwilling to compromise and and he does something about it. He won't be. That's what his father is asking him to do. His father says, you need to suck it up, just be this, you've got to be it for 10 years, and after that, do whatever you want to do. And then that's just not in his character. And it's interesting, even though he's acting, he's not looking at acting as a being thing. He's looking at acting as this is what I want to do. Even in the way he expresses it.
There was even, I think,
Chris?
Who had the.
Yeah.
Is that always the change, or the? Well, not always the change because there isn't always change, but from beer to doer or doer to beer.
It's always implied. It doesn't have to be explicit. If you look at the domains, and you look at the domains of the main and influence character, they're dynamic pairs, they're dynamic opposites.
Right.
And you can see, go down the list, either the domain, concern, issue, problem. The swap will happen at you'll see the swap at one or more of those levels. If it's a really, really big change, then you usually see it at the domain level. Because really the influence character is saying, look, you're looking at the world all wrong. Don't look at it from the outside, look at it from the inside. Or don't look at it from the inside, look at it from the outside. Because state and process are going to be the same. Whether they're both in a stuck or they're both in something that's out of control, that part's similar, which is what makes an influence character have influence, because they are the same and they are different. So usually you will find that relationship, sometimes it's played up, sometimes it's not. If you look at Star Wars, Obi-Wan Kenobi is the beer, and he's talking about, the Force flows through you, and, he's really talking about very holistic being kind of things, but it's really, at the end, it's not made a big deal of it. Luke changes, but we don't really think about, he's now learned to see the world and let the Force flow through him, and it's like, okay, he's done that, but so character development is such a small thing, they don't really care.
Yeah, but in the next movie, that's what they open up with, is him learning how to be.
Because he has changed. That's right. Right. And if you look at Unforgiven, here you had a doer who, in the backstory, got married, promised he would not do again. He would be a beer. And we start off the movie, and he's a beer, and all through the story, he is struggling to remain a beer, and eventually, he goes through a change, and he is a badass doer. So that's the conflict.
That's the dynamic. Okay, thank you. That's helpful.
Sure. Okay, and for the main character approach, do or beer? Beer, yeah, I think so. Problem-solving style, linear, holistic. Do we know enough?
No. We're off.
Okay.
Look at us all.
It's like grows his desk set.
Yeah, but that's what
No,
Neil
no,
tells
no,
him
no,
to throw the desk.
Right. That was it. That was the influence to do something. Yeah.
Mhm.
He's test driving the doing thing.
Yeah, he's sitting in his room trying to write poetry and rejecting, crumpling up his pages and so there's something inside of him. There's something, but he's
What about the poetry one in the class? Did you get anything out of it?
well that's where Keating is bringing it out in him because.
But look to what Keating says about him before that. I think that's much more indicative of about his approach. Remember, he says, "You believe you're not worth it. That you're not worthwhile. That nothing you do." And that's when he was writing. He was writing, and then it's like, "Oh, this is crap."
Mm-hmm.
But it's like I can't. I have an assignment. If I need to do this, and if I do this, it will lead to that, and I don't want to go there. So I'm just not going to do it.
Mm-hmm.
Which is it's kind of a linear way of dealing with feelings. Just like I can't. But I would leave it alone.
Mm-hmm.
I agree. I don't know that there's enough there to look at it. It may be holistic. We just don't know enough about it.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes you're holistic for the worst. It's like the story. In order to solve your problem, you need to take a more linear approach, and your more holistic view is what keeps you down and keeps you keeps you from seeing things properly. So, but I agree. I'd have to look at it again, and I suspect I could make an argument either way.
Right, and I think primarily because it's a very complex character. Complex
He doesn't seem to
character.
ever want to upset the group.
I don't think. No, I disagree because he's basically constantly telling him, "No, I don't want to do that. I don't want to be part of the group. I don't want to do that because I don't want to speak out loud. I don't want to join the group because I don't want to talk." And so it's like, that's what I'm saying.
Either way.
I know. That's why I don't think it's clear. So we just don't answer it.
Okay.
That's the loveliness of it. Okay. Action or driver is action or decision. Why? And give some instances of maybe the drivers.
Seems like the first major incident is Keating walks into the classroom and
Well, they get the book.
Yeah, he
Action,
uncovers
okay.
the yearbook.
Well, I mean, there's kind of like one really big turning point.
The suicide.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That'd be an action.
And you also have the story closes with basically Keating leaving,
Right.
Mm-hmm.
or
standing up.
right, depending. That's more subjective story, but that's fine. That's because that's actually part of the overall story is him trying to do that. So that them standing up, pretty much, the story is over. The inciting event is we have a new English teacher.
The concluding event is
we have a new English teacher. The new English teacher. Bye-bye.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I mean, we could probably tweak exactly where the actors are, especially since you've got those little sub-stories that kind of prolong
I'm
parts
thinking
of
about
it.
Knox Overstreet too. It's like he sees her,
Right.
and that's where his story.
I mean,
is.
yeah, his whole little cycle. He's got a complete sub-story in there
Yeah,
from the inciting event through the concluding event.
but his sub story wouldn't have to have the same driver.
No, not at all.
Yeah.
It just happens to. What that does is because it's similar, it feels like it's part of the same story, and it doesn't fight with it, and you don't go, wait, is this the same story or not? and very often what will happen is when you do a sub-story or multiple stories in a single work, you'll have, maybe half of the dynamics be similar, so that there's enough to sort of do lots of double duty, or multiple duty, and but enough to differentiate them. If they're too close, then it's really confusing. The story forms for Jerry Maguire, I think, are just a tad too close.
Mm-hmm.
That it's easy to confuse the two.
It's a little awkward overlap. Too, yeah.
Right, because they kind of didn't want to spend so much time, whether organically this was a decision or it was consciously a decision. I think they only have two dynamics that are different. Both of them have main characters that are steadfast and influence characters that change. It's just that Jerry Maguire happens to play main character in one and influence character in the other, so he changes and he's steadfast in one context and changes in the other, so it looks like, ooh, huh? That's why really understanding the context, and when the story forms are really close, you can get confusing. Okay, so we'll do action. We'll see what pops up. Time lock or option lock?
It's an option.
Well,
It's not a time lock.
Well, not, but options toward what end is what are the
What are the options to break down?
What is the what brings it to a climax?
Well, I think, is it forcing the conformity to signing the letter?
That I'd say that's the climax. That pretty much brings the climax. It's not the end of the story. The driver brings you to the end of the story. The limit brings you to that crisis.
I feel like the options are sort of, they keep talking to Keating about the way he's teaching.
Yeah, how far can you push the envelope on nonconformity?
Yeah, and then
because first they don't really say anything, then they start looking askance at it, then they start frowning, and then they start questioning, and then they really start questioning, and then it turns over into this guy's not going to work until we're running him out on a rail.
Right.
That's too much. So the crisis is the group having to sign the petition, and it's the 5 names that you were talking about. Those are really the group.
Yeah.
Those are the key people, which feel much more like a subjective group, but because they're so tight. All right. Now, what about outcome, success or failure?
Failure.
Failure how? What is the goal?
teach.
No, it have to be success, right? The goal is to get them to non-conform, and they non-conform at the end.
Well, that's if Keating is the protagonist.
Well, even if it's
even if you look at what's his name, he pretty much is the same thing. He's
That's right.
he is non-conforming.
That's right.
And when he's Neil, and when he's forced to a choice between conforming and non-conforming,
That's what I was going to say.
he basically takes himself out of the equation. He will not conform. Because that's in that world, that's about the most nonconformist thing to do. It's because it's shocking and terrible.
But do we consider the goal is living in a nonconformist way, or just being nonconformist?
Well, let me back up. Think of it without thinking about Todd and Neil, because they're subjective characters. If you're going to think about as the Dead Poets Society, the students of the new English teacher. That's where you're going to find out.
You also want to ask, do the good guys win or do the bad guys win? And even though there's that moment at the end that flusters the headmaster, the headmaster wins. The headmaster gets everything he wants. He gets the letter signed. The parent, Neil's father, who was the other major antagonist, basically gets what he wants because
Neil's father gets what he wants?
He gets the investigation. He gets, he basically
I think you're stepping. I think you're
Okay.
reading too much in that.
Well, but
I think Neil's father is part of Neil's personal. I think that's part of the influence character thread.
but it's still part of the overall conflict of
Only insofar as it supports the headmaster.
Right. Okay. But yes, the headmaster. Even though somebody, you wish somebody would have spoken up and says, no, it's not Keating's fault, it's his own father's fault. But nobody's going to say that. Not
Because
this
that
environment.
wasn't. Remember, that wasn't the issue. They even voiced what the consequences the boys do when they're in sort of their last Dead Poets Society meeting.
In the attic.
Yeah. A scandal like this can bring down the entire institution.
Mm-hmm.
So that's not about his father getting whatever. This is a bigger thing.
So don't you guys feel there's a bittersweet aspect to the?
Well, we are only talking about one half so far.
Yeah, it's just that I anticipate the other, but I might be wrong about that one too. So.
Well, no, I feel like it's failure good because I feel like objectively the bad guys win, but subjectively the good guys kind of win.
That's what I feel.
You know.
Right. You're stretching.
No, because if the goal is to non-conform, then we got those students to non-conform at the end by standing up on the table.
Right, but conformity has won in the form of him being out. Because next year there is no non-conformity at that school anymore.
Right. Because as you said earlier,
So
all the
except
students are getting
on the
beat down.
personal level. On the personal level, it
Next year
does.
doesn't matter because what matters is the context of the story.
Right.
That's a completely different
Yeah, but remember
No,
how
but-
remember how we're opening. We're setting up the overall story context with this this gathering in the chapel or whatever.
With the 4 pillars.
Yeah.
And the 4 pillars remain standing at the end of the story.
Well, basically the attitude or
Well, no, I mean, look, it's the men's prep school. There's pressure to conform, and at the end of it, you basically say the pressure has won for this school. The culprits. Is the Dead Poet Society still alive? No. And the Dead Poet Society is the representation of the nonconformity.
Isn't it more of a
But
case
it
of
still survives.
No, it's not. You've got one person dead, one has been, the protagonist has been dead, is the one who's put it all together is dead. The one who is probably the most second most interesting person in terms of driving things has been expelled, and the rest
and their mentor has been fired.
and right. I mean, pretty much it's receded back into the pages of that book.
them stepping up on the desk, isn't that more of a case of a dividend?
Perhaps, but it's definitely a subjective thing.
Another objective proof that conformity
Because of-
won is they go back to that essay, read the
Right.
Pritchett essay.
And it's being read,
Right.
It's being read in spite of.
In spite of it all.
in spite of all the pages being torn out, they're literally back to square one.
Right.
The group standing up isn't a subjective thing because the group isn't part of it. Subjective.
But
Right,
not
it's
everyone
not-
has to win.
This is
or
not
lose
this is
for
not
success or failure.
black and white. No, it's not. There's win and there's win. And there's lose and there's lose. And you can have a dividend that seems to outweigh the consequence. We'll have to look and see. But I mean, that's one thing. We can leave it open. That's fine. We can look and see what the consequences are when we start that and see
Or tossed it over, yeah.
what those mitigating factors. Because this is the furthest thing from a really simplistic story. So I'm fine with leaving that open since we've got a split decision. So let's move on to judgment, good or bad.
Good.
Well, that's really good.
Oh, okay, good. All right.
All right.
So, I mean, just from the feel of it, I would say it's probably a bittersweet ending because having what's his name at the front and Keating on the way out is not a success. It's back to the way things were when he was an English teacher.
But but it's a personal triumph for Todd. He
Absolutely, that's why it's
he
good.
Finally,
Right, it's absolutely
came out of the shell.
no argument. We're all definitely for him. He's changed, and it's worked out good for him. He is now, he is no longer in his shell. Now, is he going to be a conformist? We don't know, because that was not what he was about personally. But he certainly is willing to buck the system. So in that regard, it's not a black and white thing. The fact that if everybody in that room stood up, I'd say he'd clearly be a success. The fact that it's mixed, to me, gives you that bittersweet ending. Some of them win, some lose. But personally, we see it's a really good deal for him. But let's leave it.
No, it's fine.
No,
No,
really, it's okay.
It's okay. What, you want to do this?
Yeah.
I do. Yes, I do. I want to leave it unanswered. All right. So now let's look at the domains. Anybody have thoughts? Yes.
I'll give my 2 cents. I think OS is in psychology
Okay.
because I think it's
Well, no, don't
Okay.
don't go into. Just tell me
so
why. Don't give me
I would
the.
say OS in psychology. I would say objective story activity. I would probably put then Todd in mind and Neil in situation.
Okay, and how do we? Why? What is Todd's attitude, and what is Neil's situation?
So I would say Todd is convinced that he's not worth anything. He's got a fixed mindset in that he's not going to be speaking, he's not going to be engaging in all those activities.
Okay.
I would say that Neil is situational because he is stuck in a situation in life where basically he's in a particular mold because of his parents and he only has that life to look forward, nothing else.
Okay, and then the manipulation or psychology is the overall story domain as it relates to the students and the teacher.
Yeah, I would say that it's it's all about trying to get the students to think the way they want them to think, not break out of the mold or think for themselves. And the activity would become about what do we engage in when we're not in school? Do we do the death for society thing? Are you coming with us? Are you coming and have fun with us and do all these things that we're not supposed to be doing? Are you going to be studying chemistry? Are you going to be studying acting? Blah blah blah. Do you do your project?
Okay. Everybody okay?
Well,
Issue? Alternative?
Well, no, just alternative. Only because it's clear the overall story is in one of the internal domains.
Sorry, what?
In one of the internal domains, psychology or mind. I was starting to think. I was starting to get the feeling that the relationship between Todd and Neil is kind of situational because they're roommates. The reason they are in a relationship because they're roommates. They also have again similar parent issues and but again that relationship isn't hugely developed.
But if you look at when the two of them are interacting as growing friends, it's almost always as an activity.
Okay.
Whether it's throwing the desk set off,
True.
whether it is running around the bedroom, whether it's getting someone to join something where he doesn't have to do something. Be part of the activity. We'll find a place where you're comfortable, but we want you to, get out and get about.
All right. Because I was also thinking of Neil being an activity because he is the one. Of course, that's partly because he's the protagonist, but he did feel activity to me.
But that's not what he's about. He does things, but that's not what he's about.
Okay.
I mean, he has this. The pressures on him are what influence Todd. The fact that he sees his friend is stuck with this father who won't allow him to do things. Here's a doer who is being said, no, you cannot do process. You have this state. You must do everything based on this relationship, on this status. We're not rich. We are not. We have a. I've done everything I can to get you here. You are my son. As long as you are my son, you're in this relationship. You must behave within that box, and you're defined by your relationship to me. Period. And when you go through this and you get to the other side, when you're your own person, you can do whatever you want. But until, and of course, the reality is that's not going to change.
Because all right, yeah, and again, it's where you attribute those points, because again, my final point about putting the OS in fixed attitude is just the headmaster being the principal antagonist here is sort of like Claudius and Hamlet, just maintaining this mindset that of it's about conformity, and you see all the other teachers doing the same thing, and what's important is maintaining that mindset. But it could just as easily be manipulation.
Yeah, but it's not what they think, it's how they.
Right. We want. Yeah, they're not saying here's your belief system. They say here are your frames of reference, and and here's how you may think or not. We want you to think this way, not that way. They're not saying here's what we want you to think, but we want you to use these values, not these other values.
And it's almost like at the end, like a majority of them have a different viewpoint, right?
Right. I mean, Keating is the biggest one. You look, most of the movie is about Keating saying, "Think different."
Okay.
I mean,
all right. Well,
look how you're thinking. Now try thinking differently. I don't care what that is.
Well, he even says that.
Yes, no, I know.
Yeah, specifically. To
right.
The other,
when they're walking around and.
No, he says it to he says it to the his friend. He says,
right.
I thought the point was to teach him to think.
Right.
And also, thought to me, thought feels more like a state.
He's stuck.
As a
right.
meandering process.
He can't get out. He needs. He's like stuck. He's not out of control. I mean, if you're going to say, if anybody was going to be sort of more of the out of control, it's the Wanda. Wanda. Yeah. But he's not one of the subjective characters. It's not a story about him. That's just an approach that is shown to be not effective at surviving in a conformist world. Which in our culture isn't necessarily, the message is that's not a bad thing. Unless you're in 1950s or late, early 60s. That environment, I think that time frame was very specific because of the change in teaching styles, the change in social mores, the change, you got a little bit of that at the party. That was one of the reasons I think why they really wanted to have what's his name go to that party, huh?
Knox.
Yeah, Knox go to that party is to get outside the school to see what the rest of the world is like, what other teenagers are doing, or college students are doing, and it's a completely different world where they're kissing and all this stuff, and he's like, drinking, all these things that are just not at all in that little world that is the prep school. I think that's that's the nice thing about that little sub-story is it gets you out. It's kind of like being in a play. You got to break out of that room and do something, see something different. So it gives us that. It also brings, thematically, it brings love into it, which is one of the romantic subjects. From the romance poets. So it's just very it's very nicely incorporated into the thematic elements of the story. Okay, so let's bring up the software, and it's going to be just a moment because I didn't turn on the projector. I didn't want that sound to be front and foremost in the recording. Okay. I'm going to turn off one of the lights. I would have just left it on that one big screen, except I don't have a connector. But yeah, I don't think I do. Okay. Can't hold your water, huh?
Ruin my.
Hold your water, so we'll hold for our last note. That. And that's it. Okay. So you can kind of sort of read that. Maybe except, are you switching to the, okay, great. So let's answer the questions that we've got. We have our main character resolved. So fear, left the problem solving style alone. There's action, option lock, judgment, good. And then our overall story we said was manipulation. Okay. So if we move, let me save this. This
Okay. How does it how does the whole act?
Oh, he just comes in saying with his flyer, says, "I know what I'm going to do. You know, I've always wanted to do this." That was.
But you could see, the character development leading up to that. You could see how that was inspired by Keating.
Right.
Yeah.
All right. So now what we want to do is we want to look at the concerns, and we have in psychology or manipulation, we've got developing a plan, playing a role, changing one's nature, conceiving. Fixed attitude, we have memories, impulsive responses, innermost desires, contemplation. In the influence character, we've got the past, how things are changing, the future, the present, and then we've got inactivity, which is the relationship. We've got understanding, doing, obtaining, and gathering information. So, anybody have a? Go ahead.
I could argue a couple.
Well,
so,
argue the one you want to argue, and if somebody has another one, they'll argue that, and then you can be convinced out of it or not.
I think I could go with the upper right.
Well, why'd you say what that is?
So, playing a role in
the overall story.
In the overall story, response, doing for activity, how things are changing, or
how things are progressing.
How things are progressing, which way it's going.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's one.
They
could be benchmarks, but I'm thinking they're concerned they could work.
Okay. Do you want to argue the points, or are you just making the points right now?
I'm just making them.
And for Neil in particular, I think future feels more like a benchmark to me than a concern. I'm agreeing with that one. I mean, that's where I'm gravitating toward too.
I'm just thinking for OS that it's all about conformity. It's all about not being who you really are. You're just being forced to play the role that people assign to you, and that's it.
And how do you fit the Dead Poet Society in there? Well, I mean,
they're putting on robes. They're acting like
they're basically playing poets. It's their own. I guess it's their own escape to that, to just play the role of those poets instead of doing what they would like to do in real life, but they don't have it themselves to actually become that, playing that role.
Right. So you're saying that in that instance, the message from Keating is, stop playing a role. Everybody's playing a role. It's better for you to stop. It's not, you don't need to become something else. Just
be yourself.
Act naturally. Right. Because you see the one guy who does the playing a role. He's the one who always does that. The one who's like, a cat on a mat. It's like, okay, you're just going through the motions there. At least if you're going to do it, be creative about it. And then he's the same one who starts walking around like a chicken. And he says, no, you don't have to don't play a role. Just try to find out, okay, that could work. Anybody have a supporting or alternative?
One I really like too. That's some different. Originally I thought, what about? I like to conceive an idea quadrant, but the others don't line up as well at times. But I really like expediency in the sense of you're trying to avoid bad consequences. So it's like peer pressure. So there's a lot of peer pressure, but I don't.
Well, you
I
find
can't argue
is
the rest.
that well, the thing is it the entire story or is it in a particular segment?
Yeah.
If it's in a segment, then
Yeah.
it's going to show up. It's just, okay. Now, how do we see impulsive responses for Todd?
Oh, sorry. I mean, I feel like his pain is obvious. Like he's not feeling his internal desires. The problem is it gets bottled up.
And how and what happens?
What do you mean? What happens?
There's something that a very clear illustration of this in his behavior. He stutters, he freezes, it's like,
Stays in a shell.
Well, no, he's impulsive responses are
Like you can't
the filters.
Right.
And he's got such strong filters that he can't get past them. And he's not being impulsive. Everything is, he
everything's
can't
stopped.
right until the end where he's able to sort of just, I'm going to stand up and do this, be impulsive.
And then even the one you talk about when he doesn't reach out for heating, it's like you can see it right on the surface of him. You can't get his hand to go over.
Right.
But again, in his case, I think the benchmark very clearly is innermost desires.
Right. Well, that's what you talk about. That it comes out in his poetry. How close are we seeing? Is he able to get in touch with those fears and the desires?
Yeah. But under impulsive responses, you see value and worth. I mean those
confidence
and confidence definitely.
Yeah, confidence, worry.
They are kind of fairly explicit in his story. But I think ability and desire are really good for the overall story. But we'll get there. But I agree. The playing the role when you see what when you look at where we start off and where we end up, and that's why the status quo wins, and so that's why we're feeling like it's a failure. But it's
You're feeling.
that's what I'm saying. We over here are, but they're setting up when they have everybody stand up and play this role. It's like it's the conformity. It's everybody play this role. And that's what we loop around to, and that's why I don't think it's just a signpost. I think it does describe that the being you are required to be your parents' child's your children. You're required to be these good prep school kids, and and you see it you kind of see it demonstrated with the other teachers. The trig teacher and everybody. Sit in your desks.
We see them in the beginning, and that's about it. I mean, we only see that sort of as an introduction to the variety, and then after that, we're pretty much not in any other classroom. I think that's in the setup. But look at the Dead Poets Society. I mean, that's the bulk of this movie is about the Dead Poets Society. And it's all about playing the role. And the biggest one who embodies that is Luanda.
Right.
He's got a character with a whole new name, and he talks differently, and he puts on makeup or symbols, and he's and he plays that role to the hilt that is written in the bylaws of the
which is
Don't
society.
they all suck the bone marrow of life? But the story isn't that the change that everybody sees?
Well, no, because
Go ahead. Sorry.
I was going to say, I think that's what the promise is. I think you see that at the end, some of them may follow that, may not. We
do know that someone were able to get past the pure conformity of you have to always play this role in all contexts. But even the ones that stood up at the end still play.
So what was the goal of the story then?
Well, I don't know yet.
Okay.
So what I was getting at is that you have the one who will not play the role kills himself.
Okay.
Oddly, because he's playing a role.
Well, yeah, it's a conflict between roles. That's
Right,
what it is. That's
right.
where the conflict is.
And the one who buys into playing a role, but it's a completely different role, is expelled. And everybody else conforms to the role that they're basically playing in order to stay in.
Because logistically,
they
sign the paper. Yeah.
They all sign the paper, so they all give in to that role that they're.
So then that sounds like the protagonist is not Keenan or Neil. You're making it sound like that's the headmaster. The goal is to play this role. And that's what they are.
It's which role you're playing. That's where the conflict is. What role are you going to play?
Right,
That's why I
right.
was trying to figure out what the actual goal is. Then I can see that being then I can see that being a success. But
Right. That's why I don't think it is. I know, and you would see that because that's the way you look at the story.
Can't it
Well,
be?
You tend to
know what the goal-
go for.
Can't the goal be live this life being yourself, not playing a role? So that
Yes.
it's a failure because he dies. It's a failure because
He's expelled,
he's expelled,
and everybody else basically buys into it,
Yeah.
and goes back to square one. They do. They all buy into it,
But you're
except
saying
on the
it's a living
personal level. That's why that subjective thing at the end. It's really the other ones stand up, but they really, if our main character hadn't changed and stood up,
right.
nobody else would have. And the fact that everybody else, but see, other people who had nothing to do with it stood up. So it was more of a, let's try to make this. Let's not make it really awkward with him standing up by himself, where it would have given us the same message, but it would have made it really less ambiguous, as opposed to it looks like. Again, we'll probably find some sort of dividend or something that.
Yeah, I would say there's a cost.
Well, the costs are the guys who died.
Right, but I mean, you can always justify the wrong outcome or a different outcome by either saying, well, there's lots of costs. Or
But I think that the message. I mean, I think the message is that you want to buck conformity,
Sure.
and you were left with conformity at the end.
Yeah. And again,
Because once Keating's out the door, they're not going to be standing up on those desks anymore. They're going to go back down and plow forward with their little graphs on is this a great poem or is this not a great poem?
Yeah, I just have to know what the goal is. I just need to know who the goal is, or what the goal is, and who the protagonist is.
Okay.
Well, I feel like just when he's talking to Todd, his whole point is you've got to let what's in you out. Isn't
But
that
careful though. Try not to use Todd or Neil.
Right, so if you use Keating,
No. Well, he's talking about when he's speaking. He's talking about Keating.
I really feel like I know that that's the personal story, but I also feel like because that's about poetry, it really overlaps the OS.
Well, no. That is in the OS. The poetry is the OS.
Well, I'm talking about when he's saying like standing up and saying a poem is going to scare you. You have to stand up, and you have to say the first thing in your mind, and you spin around, and it talks about. Well,
That's your impulsive responses, by the way.
Right. But I feel like in that moment, like reading Keating, who is an OS character in that, I think expresses the goal, which is you've got to express what's in you and not let this sit on top.
I think that's the influence. He stepped into influence character momentarily. I think your identification of basically you need to be able to play your own role in life, not somebody else's. I think that's and that's not what you said, but you said it better. You said it better. I was just saying that it's about finding your role in life, not the one that's imposed on you. That society imposes.
Like being a
on you.
lawyer, being a doctor,
Right. Find the one, and maybe it might be that, but that doesn't. But not. You shouldn't be that because someone else tells you that. You need to find out. You need to play the role, your own role in life, not somebody else's role for you.
right? So who plays that role? Who gives in?
Everybody gives in. They all are students. The only one that doesn't is Luanda, and Luanda is expelled.
Well,
And the other one who doesn't kills himself.
right, so that's pretty heavy cost, but he's still
But
not getting
hardly seen as being a success story. I don't think when Keating was saying that, and even with his talking to him was, you need to do this within the parameters of your life, not at any cost.
Doesn't he actually say if you get kicked out of school, that's not a success?
Yeah, he does.
He says those words.
Yeah, he does.
All right.
Right.
That's
So,
the best.
Does
way
he
to
say
do it.
OS as well?
Thank you. Ding. Okay, so that's essentially what the goal is, which isn't met, because everybody caves.
Okay. He's playing that himself.
That's good. No, but
Yeah,
you,
and
but you
again,
get the right answer.
the
Right?
denouement of, it starts with Todd, and then the group follows, but that's indicative of that kind of that feeling that, the group kind of shares the main character
The
energy.
sentiment. Yeah.
It's
And the
definitely the
sentiment.
group shares the subjective through line, at least in some sense.
Except it's only half of the group, because there are 4 of them, or 3 of them at least, out of the 6 or 7 that don't. You've got one's dead, one's evicted. You got the rat, he stays down.
Yeah.
I mean, and then you have a bunch of others that weren't even part of the group. So again, I think it's one of those things. The story is over, and now we need to do the subjective proof of the main character and the sort of that argument. And I think the main character it's an opportunity for the main character to really show his mettle, because we haven't seen it. All we've seen him is, hey, but he hasn't changed that we've seen. And this is the last opportunity that they give him, and he does. I mean, it could have just been him, and it would have been just as satisfying on that judgment good thing, but it was also a little it was gratifying that others stood up, so there's a little spit in the teacher's eye, the headmaster's eye. So I think that was something that, but what's going to happen in the next scene, because it's sort of like, well, you just reneged on that contract you signed with us. Now you're going to be put in detention and blah, 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 blah.
Or there's not one of them.
Right, but you start a different story. It basically ends it with an inequity. So it provides impetus for something to follow, if something was to follow. Yeah, that's sort of a way, if you want to have a sequel, you either leave something unresolved with an implied result, but then you change what that result was, or you wrap it up, and then you introduce a new inequity, and that then says, oh, okay, there's room for something to explore. Okay, so we said playing a role as the overall story concern, as also is the goal. All right, so now we've got, in our overall story, we have knowledge, ability, thought, and desire. Are there any particular pair of those that you like better than others? We also have, huh?
You just skip ahead.
Go ahead to what?
Very obvious.
All right, well,
So you mean down to the element level?
Yeah.
all right.
Well, stay on the theme line. To me, desire is what jumps out, because the themes really seem to be the follow your desire. Follow your passion. Live passionately, and it just seems that desire encompasses that, and that the equivalent over in the subjective story is experience. And we already talked about that. That's their relative experience. Dealing with school, dealing with parents, definitely comes into play. When we define the subjective story, we talk about experience, and so just I don't know. That seems to fit to me. And then I put Todd under worth versus value, and Neil under fantasy, because in his world, given who his father is, pursuing acting is pursuing a fantasy, so he's sort of playing with that. He is pursuing his kind of dreams and fantasies, which are, create the conflict in his through line. So that's where I would put the variations.
All right. Is that in line with what you thought?
Mm-hmm.
Everybody okay with that?
Yeah, I just think expectation, determination, trust, and test.
Right.
The whole enchilada right there. It's perfect.
All right.
Yeah.
So then what do we see?
And expectation, determination. I'm not sure which is the problem solution, but that's what is shared by Todd. So
expectation.
Well, expectation would either be problem or symptom.
Problem.
Yeah, and because obviously when you look at how some of this stuff works out, pretty high expectations and what's expected of you.
That would be the problem. Absolutely.
Wouldn't the headmaster be the impact character?
No, he's much more not even really an antagonist until the end. He's part of the system, and only toward the end does he sort of represent that conformity, in any kind of practical sense. There's always that conformity is around somewhere. Usually it's that sort of the square red-headed kid who can't, socialize. He seems to always be, well, I'm not sure if he's the antagonist. He seems to be more, no, he's much more the...
He's a contact.
In the beginning, they emphasize the tradition of the school. In the beginning of the movie, he emphasizes the tradition of the school, and this is very conformed history.
Right, but I think toward the end, again, I don't think we have archetypes, because in this context, reconsider isn't necessarily seen as a bad thing, as opposed, not really certain right now. But anyway, I think that he definitely represents that ideal that people, or that way of conformist approach, that pressure that is in fact seen as being a negative, and that is ultimately wins, but it's not seen as a good thing. So yeah, definitely.
He's representing the antagonistic values of a psychology through line.
Right.
So that would still attribute him to the objective story, not the subject.
Okay, so if we're down to 4 possible story forms, and let me save this. And we are going to then go to our story engine. We see our main character has a problem of expectation, symptom of ending, and response of unending.
Again, Todd is not all that fully developed.
With the overall story symptom of trust as being, people think trusting is the problem. Well, you certainly see that in Keating, what he's saying. It's like the whole thing about the preface, introduction in the book. Here is this official who's, because of his authority, you should trust him. And it's like, no. You need to go and test. You need to spread your wings. You need to not trust that everybody has your best interests, or what you have already known is the way to go. You need to do a lot of testing. Test your borders. Test the edges. Test everything. But that seems to work quite well. And you see the influence character, that same thing. His focus is on trust as a problem. And his father, it's like, the trust me, I know what's best for you.
Yeah, it's about trusting. Do you trust authority or not? And that applies to all the parents. That applies to whole school environment, including the board of trustees, including the textbooks.
Are they the trustees or the trusters? Oh, sorry.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
All right, but now we have a couple things we have yet to determine. So benchmarks. And we were talking about a benchmark for the overall story. We were talking about there's developing a plan, changing one's nature, and conceiving an idea. We had already been talking about possibly obtaining for the relationship and innermost desires for the main character, which would be changing one's nature for the overall story. Is that, how do we see that? If that's in fact it, or is it better to look at it from one of the others?
Well, the strongest argument I think is the impact character in future, but I also feel like Todd's benchmark would not be memories. It could be contemplations, but innermost desires is really a strong part of his through line in that he's got all this inner stuff that needs to be expressed. And that's a major part of what he's about as a character is that coming out, and that is what we see at the end finally. That's why it feels so triumphant, is that has finally come out.
Well, yeah, to me, it's a lot stronger with the main character's innermost desires. That one is much stronger. Because if you think of, that's what, with that poem, and with him constantly struggling, it's like the thing that, how well he is able to be in touch with his feelings is really an indicator of how much he's growing. Because he's certainly got a lot of feelings, but being able to express them more and understand them is very difficult for him.
But in the overall story,
You sure would like conceiving in the overall story better than
And how
it's all about them them being able to see things from a different light, different perspective, conceiving of different ways of approaching life, getting the most out of it. I see that more than whether or not they're actually able to change themselves.
change the nature of the school environment.
Change the nature of the school.
Yeah.
Present. I mean, you can make an argument for present for Neil more so than future. I think future is probably the signpost, but what he's able to do right now.
I future doesn't speak to me. Present speaks to me more.
Learning, teaching. I mean, it could be.
Yeah, that's why we don't have enough touch points on the particular story.
Yeah, changing one's nature. It doesn't seem to be about. It's not a growing up story. They're not really. That's the one I have the hardest problem with in that plot, because I like innermost desires for him. Although frankly, it's not something that's all the way. It's certainly strong.
What he thinks of himself.
Sure, of course we can look at the unique abilities. The main character unique ability, we have 3 traits of value, confidence, and worth. Now this is a failure story.
Right.
So I think
We're supposing it's good.
oh, it's a oh yes, we're supposing it's a failure story. Thank you. That's right.
What's the critical flaw for the main character?
The critical flaw: fact, threat, fantasy.
He feels threatened, by just the simple act of speaking in front of the class. So that's the thing.
If he doesn't sign,
Yeah, he doesn't sign.
is that a success? Given that right now I think it's a failure, because then threat would count, because it's like you will get kicked out of school if you don't sign this. So it's undone by threat.
Well, let's see.
But it's also, he would be undone by fact, because the fact is he was not responsible.
By fantasy.
It's not like
It's just it's never going to happen.
when you do the benchmark, it's just going to do the problem solving done, right?
I think so.
Oh well, no. Critical flaw and unique ability will set.
No, he said the benchmark. He said benchmark.
No, I'm saying the unique ability and critical flaw are tied to problem solving style as well.
But if you did benchmarking, you just chose the conceiving formula. See, that's good. Fix it.
Then we have a unique ability
Oh,
of worth and a critical flaw of fact.
All right. Well, if you went back
this is the
to
one where success or failure could be the last choice, right?
Yeah.
Ooh, all right.
Except if we look at the signposts.
Oh, okay.
So that's where you're going to find the temporal order of things. And the main character, I would say, it starts off innermost desires.
Wait, let's look at all of them before you do it. Most desires.
I don't know
When is the
we were
hand over the eye thing? Is that
That's
signpost 3 have impulsive response?
that would be
It's 2, right?
Two, but it can be 2.
Then 3 as well.
Yeah.
well if
Could
it's
be both.
see, I'm just- Oh, actually, I think that is right. Because memories, the closest thing would be to me is they're talking about his brother.
Mm-hmm.
'Cause, I mean, it's not his memory, but but you do have. What do you mean, like you don't know?
Oh, whoops.
Yeah, like you don't know, as I said. Yeah,
Well, here's
see.
my question.
Overall story:
If-
developing
if
a plan, conceiving an idea, playing a role, changing one's nature.
Changing one's nature is pretty good.
Yeah, that's I'm okay with, and that pretty much does it.
When did they conceive of the society? Was that in Act A or in Act 1? Conceiving an idea. Playing a role with the whole hiding, the whole society thing. Even thematically speaking, like I'm not telling you that I'm doing this way. That might be.
Okay. See, to me, this one reads better only because, I mean, you've got Act 3, you've got the whole thing, the little sub-story with what's his name, kind of, everybody's sort of coming into their own. You know, you've got Brant, what that guy's name? I can't remember. Huh? Yeah, Knox. I don't know why I can't remember his name. Yeah, Mr. Fort. You know, you have, I mean, even Neil. I mean, at that point, he's talking about changing his nature. You know, it's sort of like this is what I want to be. I do not want to try to shove myself back in that other box. Yeah, everybody seems to be blossoming. Luanda appears in Act 3.
I would say Nwanda at that point
Nwanda.
Is Nwanda. He doesn't turn into dead poets. Right?
Right. But he comes in the beginning of that scene, that's, you know, with the girls and all that stuff. Yeah. It's where the Dead Poet Society goes from being sort of this conceptual thing to let's become. You know,
he's also trying to he's the one who proposes bringing girls to the school and changing the nature of the school. You know, so there's that.
Mm-hmm. Which is what I think that's the actor.
So what do we get as?
Yeah, it's going to be failure since forcing.
No, I mean, yeah, I know it's failure because there are only two choices. But I just don't think the other one.
But then the whole thing with the hand over the eyes, is that later in the is that after the midpoint? I'm talking with Todd with impulsive responses. That whole scene is a signpost of him.
Yeah, but he's got a concern of him. I mean, his concern is impulsive responses. So, you know, impulsive responses and what was it? Worth, or what was his? Right. His issue.
Yeah, worth.
I mean, and that's what that in and of itself is is explored.
His ability was a critical flaw of fact.
I mean, I think the ending with your main character is his fear is that if he does something, it's going to bring about an end. If he says the wrong thing, if he talks out loud, it's going to
keeps it going.
Right. So if I stay quiet, everything will be fine. It'll keep on going. But if I say something, if I do something, it'll bring. If I try to change how things are, if I end my silence, kind of thing, it's going to cause all sorts of trouble for me. For the main character, for Todd. For his symptoms.
Keeps it unending.
Right.
Oh, yeah.
If I say something, it's going to end.
Right. Dividends are the responsible. So get it from the desk.
Oh, okay. I mean that certainly is consistent with them behaving like Todd.
Yeah.
With a little they're spontaneously doing the following the leader, but now the leader is Todd, not Mr. Keating. Yeah, I could see that. I mean, as you saw, unless we have a really strong sense of where the acts are, the failure.
Well,
success failure is yeah.
I like the overall story signpost for failure. I like that act order, but I like the act order for the main character better. Success.
Although, if you think about the memory thing, when he's got his hands over his head, it's kind of like, where is he pulling that poem from? It seems like he's pulling it from his past. No, I mean, he says...
I would say like it was the desk set or something.
The desk set?
Yeah. Just remembering how he's always gotten this every year. And just remembering that kind of stuff would be more memories. So that happens before the eyes thing, and then I'm told. I can't remember. It happens after.
Yeah, I don't remember.
No, but I mean, this feels really nice, especially conceiving an idea, which is like carpe diem. That's great, and then developing plans.
Right. That's the whole first act is basically, here's a new idea.
Yeah, and then becoming
Seize the
works
day.
great, and then playing a role in conceiving great. So, I really appreciate it.
Right, and they go back to playing the role of the good student, or not. But again, I think Anyway, so I think I like this story form. Huh?
I think it's brilliant.
Because you already had done this, except it had a different ending.
No, I didn't actually.
Oh.
I had no idea. I thought it was going to be multiple main characters and all over the place.
Well, again, I think there are a few sub stories. The Todd stuff, though, I think is really all the influence characters through line. His father, you see the mother is essentially where his future is.
Oh, right.
And especially when she comes in and she can't say anything except, good night, and you see that she's a beaten woman. This is someone who has basically succumbed to his dad, and it's a perfect foil for showing motivation as to why he can't escape it. If he gives in, he's gone. Yeah, he's just to be just like his mom.
It's great inhibitor wisdom. You guys are smart. Save yourselves, don't save Keating.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Catalyst of thought.
Yeah, catalyst of thought is really good. Yeah, it's thinking for yourself.
No, you stop that.
What?
No, you stop that thinking. Right?
Right, exactly. And then you have your unique ability of the impact character is fantasy.
Yeah, that's great.
And his critical flaw of value. That's perfect because you see the father basically enumerating what his value is.
Mm-hmm.
This is how much you are, you.
You really can't.
Pardon?
No.
Yeah, I mean, it's just sort of like, you're only of value to me if you follow these rules, and if you do not follow these rules, yeah, you can earn this much money, and you go to this school, and you do this and this and this, and without that, you have no value. Yeah, that's pretty good. And in the relationship, we've got activity, concern of doing, issue of experience. Well, that's a great one. I mean, because you've got someone who's totally inexperienced with someone who is really experienced. I mean, that's brought up right the very first time that they're introduced, the scene that you missed.
I saw it
Oh,
15 years ago.
oh, right.
Oh, yeah.
But you missed today.
Yeah.
The catalyst of enlightenment with an inhibitor of knowledge. I think that's within a benchmark of learning. Yeah, and I think the learning is that's you know, you got to come with, you got to learn how to do this, you got to learn how to join a club, you got to learn how to do things, you got to learn, you know. No, that does work nicely. And we see a forewarning of contemplation. You know, they're starting to think about.
That one I really like.
Yeah. Uh-oh, they're catching on. They're starting to think about
Weird stuff.
you know, and I think you see little bits of that in the weasel, the rat. You know, he kind of is a little bit of a canary in that regard.
I even like preconditions of the present, because that's like, you've got to deal with school.
Right.
Like, society is imposing school on you.
Right. Normally, when other people don't have to deal with it, you have to deal with the things that are right now.
Yeah.
You can't deal with. And his father, you see, the father as part of the overall story represents that particular too. It's like, you know, you have so many things that are going on. You cannot be dealing with this other stuff. You have to focus right now on what you're doing this semester. You know, you see that dad sort of does sort of double duty there. And the requirements, I like the requirements of conceiving an idea. Great consequence doing.
Yeah.
I mean, you really see that with those frickin' charts that they're going to have to do. You know those charts? Well, throw them out. Okay, well, you lose? Okay, back to doing those graphs of whether or not how great a poem is. You know, that's, I mean, a perfect illustration of that. I'm happy with it. I can't believe we got here because I really didn't have a clue. Nope. Okay. Well, great. That's it for tonight then. Next month is Moonstruck.
No, Ida.
Oh, it's Ida. Oh, sorry. Next month is Ida.
Ida?
You can rent it on Netflix. I didn't know that at the time, but so it is available on Netflix.
Okay. See if we can get it on Amazon.
Probably.
Yeah.
Well, of course, I joined Amazon. I joined Netflix. I hate because you can't see what they have until you join. So I joined and so the Poet Society available only on DVD.
Yeah.
Great, thanks.
So what did you were able to stream it, or what did you do?
No, I rented it from the iTunes.
Okay.
For $4.
Oh,
It's cheaper than buying a DVD.
yeah.
About
Yep. Kind of fun to have the box over here, but hey, taking up space.
no.
I mean, if you get the physical DVD.
Yeah, except I've got them and I've got them and they're piled up and they're piling up and it's like.
Wow, it's only got 1.5 stars.
Ida?
Yeah.
That's my name.
Really?
What?
Ida has 1.5 stars?
Yeah.
Ooh.
It was on a scale of 1.5.
It was on this list. Not something that I.
Switch out for Bridget.
That's not for my.
Yeah, it was done by
Not. I don't know. I mean, there's a couple things that are recommended. One of the top. There's not for an Academy Award. Well, although the ones we've done,
Here on iTunes, it's 7.
okay,
And not
that's
iTunes.
good.
IMDb, it's 7.
Oh, okay.
Chris, you wanted a reminder to talk about something at the end.
What? Oh no, that was actually something I need to talk
That's
to.
a personal.
It's a personal.
96.
Sorry.
90%.
Oh,
96%.
that's good.
I think I did those. Yeah, 96%. Yeah. And it's. I think it's. That's even really good.
Rimmon,
92%?
Yeah, but how many?
250.
And how many on Ida? Oh, so it's okay. So it said boyfriend. Roommate's friend. Pardon?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I think that.
All right.
Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
See you next week, Diane.
What?
See you next week, right?
No.